think I will take this out of there. Thank you, and thank you all for coming. And you can see that I have my friend Nick Anderson, but that's actually Major John Bidwell there. He's going to help me with his presentation.
Good morning.
And can't move very far with this thing. I want you to picture John Bidwell in 1847. He would have looked, well, that's a nice cleaned up picture of him there, the photo. That was 1850 when he was 30 years old. In 1847, he has just turned 28. He's been through the Mexican War. He's now Major John Bidwell. He has always wanted to settle up here, right here where we're living now. But Rancho Chico, well, William Dickey had gotten that. He'd beaten him to it, asking for that grant. So he didn't have that yet. And he was still working occasionally for John Sutter, but he was no longer full-time with Sutter. He was as his business manager or the manager at the Hawk Farm. So, because he wants to have a farm of his own. And we actually know quite a bit about Bidwell during the gold rush because there's so many sources. The New Helvetia Diary was the daily journal they kept at Sutter's Fort. Who came, who left, different activities, different projects. Little short entries. There's also a lot of letters to and from Bidwell in the State Library. And Bidwell gave 2 dictations to agents of Hubert Howe Bancroft in 1877 and 1891. So there's actually quite a bit of information about where he was. So we're going to look at how he discovered gold, where, when, what happened with that. Another note about gold in California, he had actually heard rumors of gold already during the 1840s. During the Mexican War, he was down in, he explored a gold mine in the San Fernando Hills. But it produced so little, he thought, that's not really worth it. And when he was at the Hawk Farm, there was another employee at the Hawk Farm named Pablo Gutierrez who had taken a land grant on the Bear River. And Pablo said, I think there's gold in the Bear River. We should go take a look. And they did go take a look. And Pablo says, well, they're talking in Spanish, of course, but Bidwell's, you know, he knew Spanish, but he wasn't maybe real fluent yet because he didn't know what a batea was. And all a batea was a shallow wooden bowl that the Mexicans would use to wash gold out of the sands. But Bidwell got this idea it was some complicated device and they were going to have to go down to Mexico to get it, and then this war happens and Pablo gets killed, and that was the end of that. But Bidwell wasn't really after gold, he was after farmland. That's what he'd come to California for, was farmland. So he's up here and he's drawing maps, and this is a map of the ranchos in this area. And Rancho Chico was pretty easy to delineate the boundaries of because, you know, there's Chico Creek, there's the Sacramento River, there's the hills, that's Rancho Chico. These other ranchos, you can see by looking at another map, and I think he drew both these maps, that they don't always line up in the same way. But Edward Farwell has the grant just south of Chico Creek. He called it New Salem, but it's usually referred to as the Farwell Grant. And they had made a deal, Bidwell and Farwell, that Bidwell could settle on that grant, on Little Butte Creek. And he's getting a farm started on Little Butte Creek. And he's digging ditches, he's making corrals, getting livestock, he's developed a relationship with the local Indians, he's employing them. This is 1847, and that's his goal, is to get a farm started there. So, the New Helvetia Diary tells when Bidwell comes and goes. And in August 19th, it says, Mr. Bidwell arrived from the upper part of the valley. In August 27th, Sutter says, made a contract and entered into partnership with Marshall for a sawmill to be built on the American River. And Bidwell's the one who drew up that contract. He had looked at the site. He didn't think it was a good location for a sawmill, but you know, Marshall had decided on that, and that's where they were going to go. So he draws up that contract. Marshall goes off to build a sawmill. In December, here he is back, and he's going back and forth. He's always, he must have been on a horse all the time. He's always going back and forth, not only to Sutter's Fort and up here, but also to places like Sonoma, and he wants to get to Monterey and different places. So December 2nd, he arrived from Sonoma. December 3rd, Mr. Bidwell surveyed a straight road to the mill at Natomo. So he's still doing those kind of jobs for Sutter. Mr. Bidwell started for his farm on the Upper Sacramento with his team, and Fraser and Wade, which has been at work here. Fraser and Wade, Thomas Fraser and Edward Wade were two members of the Mormon Battalion. And the Mormon Battalion had ended up in California, and they were working that year. I mean, you can't travel back to the Great Salt Lake in December. So they're working over the winter, earning money, so that in the spring they can go rejoin the Saints in Utah. So that's Fraser and Wade. He's also, I think, using Fraser and Wade and other employees to build a house for Larkin on the Larkin's Children's Rancho, but we'll get to that later, because that's in a letter. Okay, then everything changes. January 24th, 1848, Marshall finds gold. And on January 28th, the New Helvetia Diary says, Marshall arrived here on very important business. Now, it doesn't usually say that he arrived on very important business, so obviously this is when he shows up with a sample of gold. But Sutter's not sure that it's gold. That's the little flake. It's in the Smithsonian that Marshall found. And this is what's called the Wimmer nugget. And the Wimmer nugget is in the Bancroft Library. Jenny and Peter Wimmer were working with Marshall to build that sawmill. Jenny was, you know, cook and laundress and all of that, and she tested gold in her soap kettle. And so Sutter gave her this little nugget that she wore the rest of her life. And here is what Bidwell is writing to Thomas O. Larkin, who's the American consul at Monterey.
I have no news to communicate whatsoever from this quarter. The people are generally in good health, have had a beautiful winter, and the vegetation is putting forth rapidly. I have no doubt the Sacramento Valley will be as healthy this coming summer as any part of California.
Okay, that's him writing on February 28th to Larkin, and Bidwell obviously has not heard of the gold discovery yet. But the next day, he arrives at Sutter's Fort, and somewhere in the next couple days, Sutter shows him the gold sample, because he wants Bidwell to take that sample of gold and take it to San Francisco to have it assayed. And Sutter is anxious to keep this under his hat. He doesn't want the word to get out. If the word gets out, everybody will leave his ranch, the wheat won't get harvested, nothing will happen, and he's got lots of projects going on. I mean, he's trying to build himself a barony here, and if everybody finds out about gold, then it's all going to fall to pieces, which it does for Sutter. But Sutter, it takes a while for Bidwell to actually get himself to San Francisco. First he has to look for some lost horses. Then his whole plan was to go over to Sonoma and San Rafael to get fruit trees and vines for his farm.
That very spring that gold was discovered, I was preparing to set out my farm. And just as I got the irrigation ditches dug, they were the first in the Sacramento Valley. Well, as soon as I got my ditch ready, and the ground prepared, Well, I went over to San Rafael and got my trees. I crossed over into San Francisco and reported this discovery of gold.
Now, so somewhere in mid-March, he doesn't give a date, he has that gold assayed in San Francisco. And they're still trying to keep it quiet, but word gets out. Word gets out right away, I guess, because this is the San Francisco newspaper of the day on March 15th, reporting that a gold mine found in the newly made raceway of the sawmill recently erected by Captain Sutter on the American Fork, gold has been found in considerable quantities. So it's March, and they're starting to hear about this. But actually it's going to take a while for men to get moving and to decide that maybe this isn't just a rumor, maybe this really is a significant amount of gold. So Bidwell is reported in the New Helvetia Diary to arrive on March 27th, so he reports to Sutter, yes, it is gold. Then he leaves on the 29th and comes up here.
While my horse was off feeding, I took a tin cup, went down to the river and washed it. Every cupful, I took out small particles of gold.
So, in early April, Bidwell and his friends decide to go look for gold in Butte Creek and the Feather River. Go ahead.
Well, as nearly as I can recall at the time, it was late March or early April of 1848 when I discovered gold in the sands of the Feather River near the town of present-day Biggs. A week or two later, I found myself and a few men finding gold on Butte Creek, on the west branch of the Feather River, and in several ravines, and on the main Feather River at White Rock.
And I have no idea where White Rock is. If anybody knows where that would have been.
I'm not telling you.
Good answer.
And this is from a letter that Bidwell wrote in 1898 from a man named A. Ekman, who was inquiring for more information about his gold discovery. But we'll see a little bit more from him. But before they do a little prospecting around Butte Creek and the Feather River. But Bidwell and William Dickey also, they go to Sutter's Fort and they go to Coloma, because Coloma is where the gold is right now. So they stake claims there. And we've got a quote here from him.
I went out, as the others did, to see the place and made arrangements to hold mining claims. There Marshall had built a little cabin for me so I could hold the claim.
And then they come back to Sutter's Fort, then Bidwell and George McKinstry go down to the Cosumnes River to look for gold there. But he had made a deal with Sutter that he would survey Sutterville. Sutter didn't want to put his town, excuse me a minute. He didn't want to put it where it is now, where Old Sacramento is, which is where Sam Brandon was moving. He wanted on a higher ground at a place that he called Sutterville, of course. He liked to name things after himself. Sutter did. And there's still a Sutterville Road, and there's a marker there, but there was never any town of Sutterville to speak of. But Bidwell had said he would do that job of surveying, and he was a man who kept his promises. He was thinking about gold, but he's surveying Sutterville for a week. And then he writes to McKinstry, George McKinstry, and has this to say. Just a second, there we go.
We ought to make early arrangements for cattle, for beef, because everything in the provision line is about to command an exorbitant price. And unless we guard in time against it, well, we should lose a great deal.
And then he comes back up here. Now, you can see there are already men starting to come in. This is, mid-May, April, May, looking for gold in the hills, on the rivers. And they can see that those people are going to need tools, they're going to need food, they're going to need supplies. So they're thinking, okay, we could do that. We could supply. They're going to have to do some shopping. So in late May, Bidwell assembles some friends, and they go prospecting on the Feather River. He says, I think it was late, this is that letter to Ekman in 1898, I think it was in late May before we made our first mining camp on Feather River at the mouth of Morris Ravine. And I don't know where that is either. Does somebody know where Morris Ravine is?
Yeah. Morris Ravine is just below Oroville Dam and just a touch upriver from today's fish hatchery right there.
Okay.
It was very prominent gold.
Okay, that was where his first mining camp was. Good to know. It's not a secret. It's not a secret, I'm sorry.
On reaching Chico, an expedition was organized, but it took some time to get everything ready. We had to send twice up to Peter Lassen's mill to obtain flour. Meat had to be dried. We had to send to Sacramento for tools. In our party was Mr. Dickey, Potter, John Williams, William Northgraves, and myself. We passed the Cherokee and up on the North Fork. In nearly all the places that we prospected, we found the copper. One evening, while camped at White Rock, Dickey and I, in a short period of time, panned out about an ounce of fine gold. The others refused to prospect and said the gold we had obtained was so light that it would not weigh anything. This time we were all unfamiliar with the weight of gold, but I'm satisfied that what we panned would have been an ounce.
So they're finding gold, but haven't got to Bidwell Bar yet. But they are finding gold. And in the middle of May, he writes to Thomas Larkin again. The main topic of his letters is this, building a house or a cabin over on Larkin's Children's Rancho, which is basically where Calusa is. But he also gives a report about gold.
Well, gold has been found over an extent of 30 or 40 miles, and the people are flocking from all directions to make their fortunes. You've probably heard a great deal more than is true about the richness of the mines. Some people here come up from San Francisco expecting to make at least $100 a day. As stories increase, the stories increase as they advance. You must have heard flaming reports in Monterey. I will therefore state the facts. A man who works here will average about $10 a day.
$10 is not bad. Yeah, that would be pretty good. Of course, everything's going to cost more too. And
I've been up to my ranch, moved camp down to the bend in the Feather River, and with a quantity of meat and coarse flour have come down to take up things that were sent up in the canoe. Tomorrow, I shall land in the diggings.
And you can see in that letter, the very bottom line where it has the word diggins, which is a new word to them. But that's what they're calling anywhere where they're mining. And so what he's done is he's come up to his farm on Little Butte Creek, gathered up some supplies there, gone down to the Sutter Hawk farm, because that's where he's writing from, to pick up things that were sent up in a boat or canoe, and then he's going up to the camp on the Feather River. On June 24th, he writes to McKinstry from what he calls Feather River below First Camp.
Last week we did tolerably well. Washing the sands along the river, we made something not far from $1,000. Well, this week we've done but little. The first camp above where we were when you came to us was good. The first day of our arrival we took out not less than $300, but the place soon became exhausted. And being small, we have not been able to find as good a one since. In fact, if Mr. McCall had not arrived, I should have sent an express to you yesterday. We are not making over $50 a day with all of our Indians. And if we do not find a good place in 1 or 2 days at most, I shall want to go down to Yuba or the American for
So he's thinking maybe he's going to have to test out some other rivers. The Yuba River, the American River, maybe there's not so much gold in the Feather River. But he had been, he had the idea that if there was gold in the American River, then surely there was gold in the Feather River too. They're coming out of the same mountains. And you notice he mentions they're not making over $50 a day with all our Indians. They are employing crews of Indian workers, and I'll say a little more about that later. But he had already developed a relationship with Indians who lived where he was trying to set up a farm. And he developed a pretty good relationship with them, so he is having them work for him. If you go down to the state library, Bidwell saved not only letters, he saved lots and lots of receipts from this period. And we've got a really, and ledger entries and all kinds of business information, because he was an organized sort of person. And you can tell from what he says that he planned ahead. We had to send up to Lassen's Ranch for flour. We had to dry meat. You can't just take off on an expedition. You've got to plan. You've got to gather up your materials. And he's doing that. So he makes a note, a memorandum of articles taken to camp belonging to Pearson B. Redding, and also some to McKinstry, because anything with MKs is McKinstry and R is Redding. But these are just items that he's noting that they don't belong to him, they belong to Redding and McKinstry, tea kettles, coffee pots, frying pans, that sort of thing. And then, July 4th, he discovers gold at Bidwell Bar.
On July 4th, I moved into Bidwell's Bar. And the next day, moved up and took possession.
And that painting is Bidwell Bar in 1856. When he was there, of course, there would have been nothing but tents. But the painting is interesting. It was done by Henry R. Biggles, who at the time, 1856, was the editor of the Butte Record, which was the first newspaper, of course, in Butte County, and was published there in Bidwell's Bar. And that painting hangs in the state library, but you've probably seen reproductions of it. So meanwhile, down in Sacramento, his partner George McKinstry, they've gone into business together, and he is shopping. And there are a lot of these receipts. And it's really interesting to see all the stuff they buy for their store. In this case, it's just stuff that they bought of W.H. McKee at Sutter's Fort. And brown drill, that's a fabric, canvas-like fabric, heavy fabric. And since they're also buying sail twine and sail needles, I think they're making tents. Somebody's making tents. Copper sheathing, I'm not sure what they were using the copper sheathing for, but there's a lot of it. Calico, plain calico and fancy prints, and linen thread. And a white mare for $24 and a hammock for $20. So they've got the money to go shopping, because there are a number of these kind of receipts. This is 1848, and that's when McKinstry's the one who's doing most of the shopping. The next year of 1849, it's going to be Bidwell who's doing most of the shopping in Sacramento. Here's another one. This is just another example. They went to Sam Brannan's establishment, bought 200 weight of flour, 6 pounds of lead, 6 bags of salt, a bottle of pepper, half a dozen knives and forks. This is all stuff you need, right? 1.5 pounds of powder. That's for the leads to make bullets, the powders for the guns. Whetstone, I don't know what one gin case is, unless it is actually a case of bottles of gin. Wooden buckets, cheese, fish line, hardtack, tea. And then there is, in the state library, a ledger from the store. And it runs from July 26th to October 10th in 1849.
I wish if you received this before you start up, that you would select a quantity of goods. I cannot leave camp again I must be there without fail, let the cargo consist in a considerable quantity of liquors, in bottles and cases, both 1,000 pounds of sugar, 50 picks. These should be of medium size, not the largest size or the smallest. If these are sent soon, we'll sell well.
Yes, I'm sure the barrels and cases of liquor would sell well, but 50 picks, that indicates there are a lot of men working at Bidwell's bar. And this is 1849, so yeah, now you're starting to get, the people from the gold rush, because it's not just Americans coming, it's Mexicans, it's, in 1848, a lot of men came down from Oregon. It's men from Chile could get here sooner than you could get here from the East Coast. They came from Australia. I mean, they were just coming from everywhere because there's gold in California. And this page here is the page that, when I did my book on John Bidwell, I wanted to include a page from the ledger. And since it was a book that I wanted students to be able to read, it was nothing but whiskey and brandy, which a lot of the pages are. And the first half of the book is written in pencil, so that doesn't reproduce it very well. So this page from September 1849, the very first line is a gentleman who's actually has a credit. He's paid $23 for all what he owes, but most of these are debits. DR stands for debit. And there's a bottle of quinine mixture. Quinine was just about the only medicine that really could help you. Then there's brandy, vinegar, sugar, flour, sugar, brandy, and emetic. I'll talk a little bit more about medicine shortly. This one. Like I said, 1849, Bidwell's doing most of the shopping in Sacramento. And most of them are foodstuffs, clothing, household supplies, mining supplies. But this one, he went to Dr. A.J. Ward, who was practicing at Sutter's Fort, to buy medicines in particular. I looked up what copaiba is, but I can't really explain it to you. Castor oil, olive oil, lime juice, spirits of niter, laudanum. He bought a vial of laudanum. Brand death pills. Brand death pills were a laxative. Sideslets powders, were also a laxative. They fizzed like Alka-Seltzer, but they would clean you out. And most of these things were either purgatives or emetics. They would clean out the digestive system, because that's kind of the only remedy they had other than quinine. There isn't quinine on here, but several of them do include quinine. So I thought it was pretty interesting what you could get in the way of remedies at the time, and there wasn't a lot of choice. But he sold, from the ledger you can tell, he sold a lot of Sideslets powders and a lot of brand dress pills and quinine. Now in that ledger, on the very first, when you open it up, on the end paper is a list of the Indian workers he had there. And since it's written in pencil, it's very difficult to read, and I haven't tried to transcribe it because it's hard to tell what the names are. But he did keep a list of his Indian workers, and besides some of the names it says bowl or pan, sort of, what equipment had been issued to them, basically. So I thought it was interesting that he did keep a list of people like that, his employees. And this is just a lithograph that comes from the Bancroft Library that depicts the variety of people who were working, for mining for gold. And there are a couple Indian workers there running a sluice box. And then I think it's supposed to indicate that there are just people from all over the world in all sorts of different native costumes working away looking for gold. And then, of course, what did he do with his earnings? Well, he bought Rancho Chico. That's how he got Rancho Chico. As I said before, Dickey had acquired it as a Mexican land grant from the Mexican governor in 1845, I think. But Bidwell just loved this area here. He called it the loveliest of places. It just looked so rich, so fertile. This is where he wanted to be, which is why he settled on the Farwell grant. But what he really, really, really wanted was Rancho Chico. And Dickey wanted to go east. So Dickey didn't sell it to Bidwell, he sold it to McKinstry. And there's this complicated sort of arrangement where George McKinstry sells him half, Bidwell sells half to Bidwell, then he sells the other half to his brother Justin McKinstry, who just flips it and sells it to Bidwell because Bidwell's the one who wants it, and McKinstry can make a little profit off of it, I think, that transaction. I cannot explain exactly why they went through that because nobody ever exactly says. But that is how John Bidwell discovered gold on the Feather River. And if you have questions, we'd be happy to answer them. That's the last slide. Yes, Debbie?
Do you have any idea how much he made? Was it ever reported that?
Oh, he wasn't going to say. But, I mean, we do know he paid, I think, $1,785 for half of Rancho Chico, and then $9,000 to McKinstry for the other half. So, I mean, that's
So he had at least close to $11,000.
well, yes, but he also had the money to start developing the ranch, building buildings, paying workers, getting cattle, getting horses, getting mules. He had the money to develop the ranch. And I think I've seen estimations of $100,000, but I don't really know. Yeah. If Mike Magliari were here, he might have a better idea. Yeah.
Well, Mike's book doesn't really talk much, you know, he has writings of Bidwell, but Bidwell's really silent about I mean, you see how he inventories stuff to great detail.
Oh, he did.
But in terms of the actual discovery of gold and how much he was taking in, there doesn't seem to be any writings about it.
Well, why would you say that?
Yeah.
Why would you tell that, you know? Yeah. So, yeah, you're right, he didn't.
Did he have a separate accountant, or did he keep all of his own records?
Well, I think he must have had a clerk in the store because I don't believe it's his handwriting, but at least throughout. In fact, I'm pretty sure he had a clerk in the store, probably more than one, because at some point in a letter, Farwell has come back. He's been very ill. He tells McKinstry in a letter, well, at least we could hire him to clerk in the store, you know. But Bidwell's the one who's making the money. Yeah, but did he have other records? Not that I've seen. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Were the Machucas living on that property when he purchased it?
I believe so. Yeah.
And
I think they were originally located further south than they, you know, were when the ranch was developed. I'm not an expert on his Indian relationships, but there is an interesting. In one letter no, it's not a letter. I think it's the 1891 dictation. He talks a little bit about employing the Indians, and he says one day he was working with one of the Indians. They were both washing gold. He goes away, he comes back, and the Indian won't talk to him. And they figure out that the Indian's keeping gold in his mouth because they've realized that this stuff must be valuable, right? And I mean, they're not stupid, right? It's got to be valuable. These people want it so badly. And Dickey says, we'll shoot him. Dickey's ready to shoot the man on the spot. And Bidwell says, no, I'll settle this. And he goes back to the store, he gets some sugar, and he trades, and he tells them, bring in the gold, I'll trade you sugar for it. Now, you may or may not think that's a fair exchange, but the Indians were willing to give up the gold for sugar because sugar was very desirable. And he was good at dealing in a non-violent way with the local tribes. And he had already been employing Indians when he was starting that farm up. And he had, developed a relationship with them. They must have trusted him to at least some extent. And yeah, so that's what we know about that. Yeah.
What happened to his farm on Little Butte Creek?
Well, that's a good question. And I don't know. I mean, there's some indication that he kept it going for a while. But once he had Rancho Chico, he moved everything up here. That's basically it. Because that wasn't really his property, and his operation was going to be on Rancho Chico. Yeah, Charles.
So how did the time when gold was discovered at Bidwell Bar and him buying Bidwell
Rancho Chico.
Did Bidwell Bar continue as an operation as a?
Oh yeah, it did. It was a successful. Where's that? It was a successful mining camp for a number of years, and then of course a little town developed there. It was the second county seat, and until pretty much they exhausted the gold there when everything moved over to Oroville, that's where the action was Bidwell Bar. Yeah.
Which is now under the lake, right?
Which is now under the lake, yes.
And did he continue taking profits out of that operation since he's...
I don't think so. I mean, well, personally, he mined in 48 and 49, and that was the end of his mining career. Because he wasn't interested in mining. He wanted a farm. That's what he was interested in. The store, I think, probably continued, and he had other interests up there, but he concentrated his efforts on Rancho Chico.
So where did you take the gold to? Sacramento or San Francisco to get?
Well, originally San Francisco, and then it probably moved to Sacramento too. I don't know exactly. Where would you take the gold to trade it in? And
to get your...
I mean, when he was doing that shopping, he was undoubtedly paying in gold dust and gold nuggets, which you would weigh out, and an ounce was worth $16. That was the norm at the time. And there are, sometimes there are some records about, about trading gold, buying things with gold, but...
Or putting it in your money in a bank? Is that, how did he...
Yeah, I don't know.
Was it under his...
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how he must have, got a bank account somewhere, but I don't know about that. Yeah.
When he went back to Washington, got elected, he wasn't using gold then, was he?
Well, no, because that was 1865.
So there's some kind of a banking system by then.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In 1850, well, I mean, there would have been by 1850, there would have been a banking system, where you could deposit things and take it out and so forth. 1848, 49, I'm not so sure what there was. Yeah. Oh, Dave.
Yeah, Mike Magliari made a comment to me just recently about what Nancy has touched on, how unusual it was that Bidwell stepped back from mining there after he had found sufficient wealth there to really do what he really wanted to do. And that was somewhat atypical of most people who wanted to continue to be involved with the mining and again. So I think that's an interesting point there about Bidwell and his own personality. And then secondly, of course, it's interesting to think about and see what happened on the Feather River in the decades after the story we've just seen here, how the Feather turned out to be one of the most productive gold areas in California, and incredible ventures were then financed and carried out on the Feather, all the way up to just below today's Lake Almanor there, where very large deposits of gold were found in the river, but then you get in to have to tunnel and to blast and to break up quartz rock, and you need investment. And so all of that began, and it went on all the way until the end of the 19th century, when Thomas Edison and his partner McLaughlin come to Oroville, and they divert the whole Feather River with that incredible wall that had to be built, and all of diverting the river so you could get right down into the bedrock of the river and hopefully recover the gold. And of course, what would Edison and McLaughlin painfully learn when they carried that out? I think in the, I don't know, was that maybe the last decade of the 1900s, 1800s, they'd find the miners on the streets of Oroville laughing because they said, yeah, we did that back in the 1850s. We were able to divert the water and get into the bed of the river and recover much of the gold. So again, all of that mining activity went on for decades there, until finally, I think really the recovery process became too expensive, and different machinations of gold price and the government again. So I don't know a lot about all of that.
Well, I don't either. I know Bidwell, but the era of, where you could get gold just by panning and, basically picking it out of the rocks and so forth, that was very short-lived. That was only a few years, 49, 50, 51, and then pretty soon it turned into a more industrial process where you had to invest, you had to dig, you had to sink shafts and so forth. And the independent miner, didn't last that long, although, people still go out panning for a little gold. And the era of using Indians for workers went by pretty quickly too, because when there was the huge influx of 49ers, they didn't want to see other men using crews of Indians. That looked like cheating to them. It was every man for himself. And so, Bidwell just wanted to farm. I do have one quote. There's a very amusing letter written by George McKinstry to his friend Edward Kern. Kern had been out here, Kern County's named after him, but he'd only been out here very briefly with Fremont. He was Fremont's cartographer. And McKinstry writes this letter in 1851 about the old Sacramento crowd who are much scattered by death and disaster. And he goes through all these old timers that they knew, men that they knew, where they are. Well, most of them are dead, they're broke, Sutter's busted, Bidwell too damn prosperous to speak of. Bidwell had good business sense. He was energetic, he was hardworking, and he was successful. And most of those old timers were not.
Yeah. Wow.
Charles.
Well, we hear the story that Stanford in his game also figured out what Bidwell figured out, which was that you can make a lot more money selling things to gold miners than you can actually mining gold.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm curious about whether you've run into any references where Bidwell knows that he's targeting the mining industry while he's farming here in Chico?
Well, he knows that he's, you know, the beef cattle, the vegetables he's growing, the wheat, all of it is to supply those miners. And when he financed the building of the Humboldt Wagon Road, it was to get products to the mines in Nevada, in the Humboldt district of Nevada. So yes, he knew his market, yes.
Now, you mentioned Potter as being one of the men that went with him.
Yeah.
That was the Potter.
Potter's Half League that he purchased as well.
What was Bidwell's relationship with Potter? Because he tried to buy.
Potter died in like 1851 or so. I'm not sure, except there's some letters where when Bidwell comes back in 1850 from Washington, because he made a trip to Washington, D.C. in 1850, he brings his brother Thomas with him. And while Bidwell is, you know, down in San Francisco or San Jose with the, you know, state senate or whatever, Thomas is up here, and he mentions old man Potter, who's, you know, ill and not going to last much longer, and drinking and so forth. And so I think on his death, Bidwell probably acquired the property, but I don't know that much about Potter. I'd have to do some research on that.
A little bit on that.
Oh, Dave knows.
Well, I was going to say, there's a few of us that spent years living in Paradise. And so that whole 54-pound gold nugget that was found out there,
oh, yes,
attributed to the founding of Dogtown and eventually Paradise. And the thing I was going to say about Stanford, the Big Four, they, you know, owned the railroads, and Bidwell was very upset at the exorbitant prices he was
oh yeah,
paying.
he was on the side of the farmers, of course.
Exactly, which is one of the reasons why he wanted to do the Humboldt Road, was because of that.
Yeah, yeah.
He wanted to get his own transportation mode. Amazing guy.
Jim, did you have something?
Do you have your little gold sample with you?
No, I don't. we have a friend who likes to go.